Oops. The song we were listening to as you arrived was John Lee Hooker's Tupelo Blues. And it's about a flood that happened in Mississippi in the 1920s, long before climate was on anyone's minds. And it's known even now as a really terrible flood. And by terrible, I mean that it lasted about a year. The entire levee system collapsed. According to the National Museum of African American History and Culture, the flood inundated 16 million acres of land, displacing nearly 640,000 people in states from Illinois to Louisiana, which is a huge swath of land. In one part of Mississippi, the river swelled to 80 miles wide. So African Americans were disproportionately affected in terms of property loss. Sharecroppers, who were not property owners, were mostly Black, and they were actually forbidden by the government to leave, while plantation owners, who were mostly white, were free to go if they needed to get out of the flooding. And in the chaos created by the aftermath of the flood, when people's emotions were high and they were all basically freaking out, there was an escalation of horrific mob violence and lynchings against Black people, mostly Black men. In some cases for things like failure to tip their hat to a white person, or declining work cleaning up in white areas of town. So you could say racism and the response to the flood were interwoven. The mindset created the response. Now, why am I reaching so far back in history to talk about the overlap of climate or ecology and justice when there are really great examples from just last month that are climate related? Well, the point of it is partly to say that the space where ecology and justice overlap is not new. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel in conceptualizing a response. Also, bringing in the music, which is only, from the 1960s, but it references this flood from the 1920s. It breaks through what my friend Mary Wagner, who's in the Green Sangha here with me, calls our collective numbness and overwhelm. So looking at the past and listening to the music, which for me, I find it very evocative of a feeling of sadness but somehow resilience too. It might help us connect with what's hard to witness today. The climate crisis demands approaches that build on what we already know about this terrain. We have our own versions of Tupelo today, complete with those who can't afford to leave and those who can, those who are murdered for not being white or for not following the rules. And this is now writ large by the global nature of the climate crisis. So it may not look exactly the same in Tupelo as it does in the Bay Area, Huehuetenango, Guatemala, Bangalore, India, or Taiz, Yemen, but we're all dealing with the same dynamic. So what is climate justice? Let me see if I can minimize this. You can read along. This is from a book I'm reading called The Sea is Rising and So Are We by Cynthia Kaufman. So for those who might be visually impaired, now or watching the recording later, I will read this. The climate justice movement is focused on challenging the powers that keep us on a path of destruction. It focuses its attention on what is needed to have a just transition, that is, a transition to a society that is both environmentally sustainable and socially just. Because we live in a world of multiple and intersecting forms of power, and that work requires careful attention to capitalism, racism, and sexism, and probably other forces as well that you can think of too. The climate crisis is a threat multiplier. So what does this actually mean? Well, let's look at one example, food insecurity. And this we can look at globally. So the 10 most food insecure countries in the world generate just 0.08% of total global CO2. The countries contributing the most carbon are the least food insecure. Climate change and rising carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere are reducing the nutrient content of staple food crops like rice, wheat, corn, and soy. These deficiencies are already a problem, and climate change is making them worse. Such deficiencies increase child mortality from diseases and illnesses like malaria, pneumonia, and diarrhea. I reference a lot of facts in this talk, so I do have references. If anyone wants them, I can follow up with you. Just let me know in chat and I will be happy to share. But I am also including references as I go. They're just hard to capture sometimes, so definitely let me know if you want any references. So I'm sorry to be US focused in this slide, but that is where I live. And so I think the same dynamic is happening in a lot of places, but within the US, communities of color are more likely to breathe polluted air, 38% more likely to be exposed to asthma-inducing chemicals, are more likely to live near coal plants. Indigenous lands are home to large coal reserves, which means that people are breathing in or otherwise impacted by the output of those mines, and they're more likely to live near toxic sites. So this means that if a hurricane does happen or an earthquake, being near those places is more likely to have a terrible impact on the people who live near them. So far, there's not a lot of Dharma in this talk, explicit Dharma. So I know this is a Buddhism conference and I'm a Buddhist, and the Dharma is an important part of what I bring to it. So I want you to know that I have not forgotten where I am. And I want us to have a chance together to use one of the tools that we have available to us, which is meditation. I've just dumped a lot of facts on people, and some of them are hard to hear. So I wanted us to do a really, really short sit, just 2 minutes. And if we can, if you want to hold in awareness the people of Tupelo while we do this, then I invite you to do that. You don't have to, you could think of all the people of Tupelo, the good guys and the bad guys. So let's just do that now. Let's, wherever you are, find a way to feel your body. It's in your breath. You might find it helpful to focus on your breath, or where you feel your body pressing against your cushion or the ground. And just breathe. And probably hasn't been quite 2 minutes, but I wanted to invite people to share and chat if you feel any different now after sitting for just 2 minutes max. I know that for myself right now, I'm feeling a lot more in my body from that little sit. Probably because I'm a little anxious about talking. but also, yeah, what we're turning toward is very painful and difficult. So this is the start of a Robert Frost poem. And the photo is a California hillside from recent fires. So I wanted to share a definition of climate justice. I'm sorry, I have mixed up my notes. Just one second. So whether looking at fire, flood, fossil fuel consumption, hurricanes, drought, or other manifestations of the climate emergency, it might seem like the imperative to address the intersection of multiple problems means we have to solve all of those problems. We can't. My suggestion is just to be informed and strategic about other forces at work that impact social justice and how climate work intersects with them. If you scratch the surface of exploitation of the earth and animals, you will find exploitation of human beings. It will be visible in things like land rights, water rights, healthcare, and patterns of incarceration. I'm suggesting that climate activists build this kind of awareness into our analysis and plans. And I want to give an example of sort of the overlapping nature of some of this from some work I did recently with some friends to track a boat that was coming to San Francisco that we knew was carrying weapons. And the plan was to go to the dock and protest and prevent the boat from docking. And I was on the research team. My job was to just find out more about this shipping company. And they do ship weapons. And they also have a statement on their website about how green they are and everything they're doing to prevent climate change. And I know this is called greenwashing, but I hadn't really seen such an example of it where it was so obvious to me that this company that was doing something that I found unethical was investing in trying to be a good citizen as far as the climate goes. And so I just found it really interesting and kind of like in a way that it startled me into waking up a little bit about the fact that, yes, we want everyone to be involved in this, but I guess my ambivalence is I don't have an answer for it. It's one of these things that's kind of a living question for me is how do I relate to that kind of thing where a corporation that's involved in something heinous is also trying to, or at least trying to look like they're tending to climate. I wouldn't discourage them from doing that, but I wouldn't necessarily ally with them in trying to do my personal work around climate with other groups to try to affect change. So it's just one of these situations where I see like things coming together in a way that isn't quite lining up with what I hope my goals will be. And so that living question is just something I wanted to share with people that comes from the ways that things are overlapping. And there's not a simple train that we're going to be able to get on that's going to take us to, whatever we're hoping to achieve with our work on climate. Let's see. Next slide. This photo is a group of people from the San Francisco Green Sangha who in May, we went to an event as part of Earth Week and meditated together with many other people outside. So, one of the questions that I know comes up for people and that others in this conference have addressed very well is, why should Buddhists be concerned with climate? What does it have to do with our efforts toward liberation? So this is from a book called A Buddhist Response to the Climate Emergency. Ringu Tokul Rinpoche says, great spiritual masters like Padmasambhava saw the world as dreamlike and illusory, yet they went to enormous effort to benefit future generations. Emptiness, interdependence, impermanence, and the dreamlike nature of things do not prevent us from taking altruistic or positive action. It may be like a dream, but it still affects beings. The issue raised in the Bodhicharya Avatara, if everything is emptiness, why is there a need for compassion? There is a need because people suffer. And the Dalai Lama, on close examination, the human mind, the human heart, and the human environment are inseparably linked together. We must recognize that we have brought about a climate emergency in order to generate the understanding and higher purpose we need now. Oh, this is a great photo of Christine. I don't know if anyone else caught her talk earlier today with two other activists, but this photo is her protesting the development of the Trans Mountain Pipeline in British Columbia. And I believe she might actually be there right now, participating in an aspect of this work. So I want to talk about what has been helpful for me in my turning toward this topic. So I've been doing activist work for long enough that for me to turn toward climate without including social justice would just be very strange. But that's not a good enough answer. We talk a lot about ethics and personal ethics, and that's vital to our work as Buddhists, and at the same time, not an end in itself. Personal ethics can only take me so far with a problem of this scale, even if in some ways my ethics practice is everything. So I found it that I must combine personal effort with building alliances and not just with Buddhists. So my experience in turning toward this was, I really wanted to address do the inner work of turning toward climate. And the way I experienced climate was as this giant mosquito that was buzzing behind me, but that I just kept swatting away. I don't know why a mosquito, but that was just what my imagination offered. And I was going on a solitary retreat, and Vimalasara, who is my private preceptor, said, just bring one book. So I brought A Buddhist Response to the Climate Emergency. And I was away for a week and actually this place I stayed had no electricity after dark because their solar generated battery was broken, whatever. And so and it was also really, really hot. It was in the 90s Fahrenheit. And so I was sweltering, and all I had was this one book on climate, and I really couldn't turn away from it. And I was meditating a lot. And while I was meditating, I realized that from having done the Satipatthana practice, that what I was experiencing was restlessness and worry. And that it was just like all the other restlessness and worry I have, and that I could turn toward it and I didn't have to be afraid of that, of my response, and that I could actually cultivate a different response, a creative response. And I know it sounds like Triratna, a brochure, for what we say, but I actually, when you experience that moment of, oh, this is just restlessness and worry, I could be doing something else, then it actually does feel like a wake-up moment. And so I found going away, actually dedicating the time to practice with what was arising around climate to be vital to me actually being able to do anything, to take any kind of positive action. And it was also the first time I really connected at all with the 5 Buddha Mandala, because my friend who was also in ordination training had given me a puja book, and it was just me, the puja book, and the other book. And I was just like, well, I guess I'll do a puja. And so I ended up putting together a puja, an Amitabha climate change puja, and doing it on the retreat. And then I brought it back to the San Francisco Buddhist Center, and we did it on a Sangha night. And then the people who were at that Sangha night, who were interested in this kind of thing, we all ended up forming a Green Sangha together, and we meet monthly. We've done the Ecosattva training from One Earth Sangha, and we've done meditations where we sit outside banks. I should look at the time. So we've done like actions together, and made sure that practice, that Buddhism is the sort of thread that runs through everything we do. And there are some senior order members, and there's a senior order member in the group, and she just brings a whole different tone to it, because I can get very in my political head about stuff. Somebody's doing donuts outside my house, spinning around, sorry. So anyway, pausing while they speed by. Okay, so that's my story for what was helpful for me, is Sangha and making time to actually turn toward this. And knowing that my personal ethics practice, like no matter how many light bulbs I buy that are the right light bulb, that's just not what the world needs, really. I mean, it's part of it, but it's just not enough. And so I do think we should be working with other Buddhists, other non-Buddhists in doing this. And I love the example set in Vancouver and other parts of the world where people are doing this. I think Scotland, I heard. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a second and play a short clip for you of audio. This is my friend Dayamudra, who's an order member here, who, I might have to share again. Okay, let me know if this doesn't work for you guys. It should, but she works with a nonprofit called Jai Bhim in India, and she shares a story here about some of the kids that she works with and how they responded when there was flooding where they live.
Last year, it was really incredible to see our school just take the lead in the community, because they were telling me things like people needed to be, they needed to be warned about the storm. They weren't getting the information, then they needed to be evacuated. And then it was just madness at these shelters, and the upper caste people were in private rooms and everybody else were just like in the big gymnasium. And then someone would come with a truck and just dump clothes and food, and everybody was just kind of, fighting over it. Really could have gotten very dangerous. And our team and our students just took like 2 weeks off from work, and they went in and they counted how many children, how many women, how many dads. And then they put a sign outside each of these emergency shelters. I think there were 12. And they met with people. They just started documenting so they could organize folks. And then when the trucks came, they were able to get a sense of, okay, this is how many people are here. And they were able to distribute things more peacefully. And that just happened very spontaneously. And a lot of the leadership came from these kids who had all dropped out of high school, but were very inspired living in a Sangha setting. So to see the cooperation and the communication and the empathy and the compassion, I think sort of that's taking our practice out into the world, like meeting the suffering in that moment.
That's really inspiring to hear. Okay, so I'll go back to share. This, what I've been able to talk about so far today just really scratches the surface. 35 minutes to share and a few minutes to try to engage more interactively is just not enough. So I'm promoting Parmi's 1 week online retreat that I think will give people a chance who are interested in this topic to really dive in with an experienced teacher. I'm not sure I'll be able to go, but I do think it looks amazing. I also wanted to mention that, I had said, we should be engaging with others, including non-Buddhists. There's a group called the Red Nation in the United States. That's a coalition of Native and non-Native activists, educators, students, and community organizers advocating Native liberation. They formed to address the marginalization and invisibility of Native struggles within mainstream social justice organizing. And they came up with something called the Red Deal, which is a movement-oriented document for climate justice and grassroots reform and revolution. So I've been on calls with the Red Nation where they were talking about the Red Deal, and they want everyone to use it. They just want people to feel free to read it and integrate it. So I'm mentioning it here because I think it is a way to involve, to bring that an Indigenous awareness into what we're doing in the world. And lastly, I will end and then we'll have time for discussion. This is one of my favorite quotes. We have so little time, we must proceed very slowly. I have this hanging outside of my office at work. When I can feel like there's a deadline or no time to get everything done, I can rush. And the reminder to actually drop the level of frenzy down and turn toward things in a more meditative way, it actually makes a much more sustainable and positive effort. On the right side is one of the things that can cause that kind of frenzy for me is the very visible impact of climate around me and the wildfires and the drought here in California, and the forced migration from the south to the north. These are real, and you can see them happening, and and they're real people that are impacted. And so why would we not be turning toward this? So thank you very much. That is my share. I will stop sharing.
Thanks so much, Rhoda Shruti. Sorry I didn't get a chance to introduce you at the start, just before we launched in. Rhoda Shruti is my good friend. She's been a fantastic speaker of online Dharma for as long as I've known her, which is quite a long time. And she's also, we think, the world's newest order member, at least for another week or so. She's kind of like a star in the firmament. So there's a bit of time for questions. Actually, Rhoda Shruti said not much time. So if you'd like to just raise your hand electronically, you can use the wee button down below, the reactions button, and we'll look out for you, and you can unmute yourself and we'll spotlight you for the duration of the question. I have a question actually, well, if everybody's a little bit question shy or you want to formulate a question. I know, Mary, that we've had conversations about you going to the southern border in the US and sort of just in a way paying attention to what's happening there. Not with a particular agenda, just to go and witness something like in an embodied way. I was curious about the kind of quality of connection you've found with people when you've actually spoken to them in situations like that. Like, how open are people who are not there to do what you're there to do? They're just going about their lives, and this is happening around them. Like, what sort of have you got any stories of connection there?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I forgot all about that. But in 2017. Trump's rhetoric around immigration was that Mexicans are dangerous and evil. And it was, pretty stressful to be immersed in that rhetoric. And so I decided, and it was also, even though on one level, I didn't believe him, I found that I was feeling afraid. And so I decided, well, I'm just going to go there. And I invited my family. So my family's from the Middle East and we've spent time there. And so I know none of them are afraid to go to so-called dangerous places. And so my mom and my dad and my brother came and we drove to see Trump's border wall prototypes. And we, drove over the border we drove to the border and then we walk across, there's a bridge. And then we got a cab and I told them where we wanted to go and they knew here's why you have to go to Mexico to see it, because on the US side, you're not allowed to visit the prototypes. These are border wall prototypes that Trump administration commissioned so that we could see which one was best, and they're all really awful. But you can't see them from the US side because they've been blocked off because they're afraid protesters will go. So you actually have to go to Mexico, look over the border at them. And so we did that and we told the cab driver where we wanted to go. And he was like, oh yeah, we know. I guess they take Trump supporter tourists there to see it, but we told them we're not Trump supporters. And everybody had told me, be careful, because there are gangs at the border and you don't know, you might get abducted. And so we were on the lookout for men in the road. That's what people said, watch out for men who just come in the road. So we're at the border, we're taking pictures, and all of a sudden there's a man in the road and he's selling ice cream. And it was the perfect metaphor for everything that I had been afraid of. I'm not saying that the border isn't dangerous. I'm not saying there aren't gangs there, but I'm saying that the stories that had been frothed up by the media, by the president, they were just stories. And that when you actually start to go toward the places where the people are that are being impacted, or it just looks very different. And that was very instructive for me. So I'm currently reading a book called The Road to San Judas, which goes into a great deal of detail about life on the border. Highly recommend it. And the more you get to know something, the less easy it is to put in a box as good or bad. That's sort of.
Thank you, Rhoda Shruti. Yeah, I experience your leadership when I hear you speak about your activism, and I'm wondering what parts of your practice are emerging as ways in which you're growing in leadership, and also perhaps in sustainability in your activism.
So I just, as you know, this is my friend who gave me the Puja book, by the way, when I took on retreat. I just got ordained, and it's actually a pretty confusing time for me, and I don't feel like a leader. So it's a challenging question to answer. I feel sustained by the foundational practices that I have cultivated over the years of being in the ordination process, and by friendship. I have been invited to be on the board of a nonprofit that would include an opportunity to learn from a lot of people who have been very active for a long time. So I'm considering whether to do that. Being involved with the Green Sangha and now with Triratna Earth Sangha gives you opportunities. This opportunity to speak was brought to me because the people they asked first weren't available. And it's not my comfort zone. But what it does is it forces me to have to look at this in a way that I would have to explain myself to someone else, to people who are serious practitioners, and just to prepare my thoughts in an organized way is helpful for my own process. So I don't know if that answers your questions.
That's great, thank you.
I was really intrigued by the reference to the red deal and just wondering if, well, for example, if you have experience in the Green Sangha out there working with Indigenous people around this issue, or any like thoughts or wisdom to impart about envisioning, if one envisions an Earth Sangha reaching out to others and having that component of it.
So the work that which is very minimal, the group that the nonprofit that I work with outside of the Sangha is called the Arab Resource and Organizing Center, and they have the connection to the Red Nation. And our work in the Green Sangha has more been on the level of being aware and respectful. So for example, we're planning an event for October, and we want to include ritual. And one of our members, Ethan, was really careful to say, we need to be really careful not to appropriate anything in our efforts around ritual that is Indigenous without looping them in an Indigenous group and working with them, because we don't want to just do it all wrong and cause more harm. So the Green Sangha that's been the level, is just kind of an awareness, remembering we're on occupied land, trying to bring that into our conversations. And when I did engage with the Red Nation, one of the things that I noticed about the conversations that we were having was that they were talking about the fact that on the reservations were most of the people they work with live, they have to have cars. And so in this, my urban world, we're trying to get everybody away from cars. And so I was really intrigued by this sort of real world, feet on the ground sense that they had, that no, we're not talking about all becoming carless. That's just not possible for these people. They wouldn't be able to get their food. And it complicated my sense of knowing what is right in a way that I found to be very productive. It also humbled me, and it made me feel like I need to listen as much as I talk, at least as much as I talk, especially if I'm working with groups where I've never been to a reservation. There's no way I could go in and tell people there what they should be doing for climate. So how important it is for the people who are doing work in certain communities to know those communities, and for people who aren't in those communities and trying to ally with them to listen really well.
And we're going to squeeze in a quick last question because it's that kind of night with, again, one of our Uber heroes behind this whole event, Prakash Raja.
Yeah, hi. It's great to be with members of the American Sangha. It's just don't get to hang out with you very often. So I guess my question is really, Rhoda Shruti, is what kind of what's your sense of how much traction climate justice and, well, climate issues per se have in the American Sangha in Triratna? Anyway, this is a question that any of the North American Triratna people could answer, but I'm just wondering if you've got a sense of that.
Yeah, my sense is that I tend to know people and befriend people in an intimate way who I have shared values with. And so I'm sure that my point of view is skewed by that. But my sense is people are very aware. And everyone I've spoken to, of everyone I've spoken to, which is probably a few dozen people, only one person says, you know what, I'm not convinced that this is really a problem. In the greater society here, there are a lot more climate deniers, but within Triratna, I've found people very receptive and interested. And they have a lot of competing things going on, and not everybody's going to want to take it on. And others might have a different take on it.
Just to say, we're slightly over time in terms of having enough space before the next meeting. So if anybody's got a quick 2 minutes, they can say something just to answer that question. And then we're going to just leave a little bit of space before the next session. Sorry to not have infinite. We should have a time timer where we can go back and like do it all again. Anybody want to add something to what Rhoda Shruti just said about North America? Shandavani, I know you've been quite involved. Nope, she's shaking her head. Good. Okay, so listen, let's just leave the space that we want to leave for our next speakers. We're going to close off your very long day, particularly if you're in the UK. You've been going at this, I don't know, for like 2 years or something at this point. Just a little reminder at the end, again, just to keep supporting the Earth Sangha. If some of you were in the last session, we did that thing of switching to gallery view and looking at the Sangha, which is you, which is us. And, you know, being the Sangha, nobody else is going to be the One Earth Triratna Sangha for us, or Triratna Earth Sangha for us. So, yes, thanks to the Earth Sangha. Thanks to you too, Rhoda Shruti. Sorry, you didn't have more time. We need to scheme some ways to get you more time, more airtime for this kind of work, because it's so essential. Maybe everybody could just unmute themselves and thank Rhoda Shruti in their own way as they head off into the ether, or a quick break before the last session. I
was just going to say, don't head off into
Rhoda Shruti.
Come to our next session at 9 o'clock about the.
Come to your next session. Yes, sorry about that.
Parlour and myself. Otherwise, it could be quite lonely.
Yes, no, please do. There's a 3-line whip. You have to come to the last session now.
And
we can thank Rhoda Shruti in the meantime.
And that would even be at 10 o'clock, not 9 o'clock.
10 o'clock, sorry, 10 o'clock. We're in the wrong time zone.
Thank you. Very well done.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Lovely
Glad you did
evening.
this.
Good night if you're going to bed.
We'll talk
Thank you.
soon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.